Neev Book Award serves as a catalyst for creating a community of writers and readers in India. It is more than just an award, though. It is a symbol for the celebration of literature as a cherished concept. And while the award has several large implications in the grand scheme of things, for me personally, the Neev Book Award saves time by shortening my considerably long reading list. Every year, I groan in frustration as I review the long list of recommendations that have been provided to me by well wishers. Of course, I'm excited to start reading every single one of them, but my dilemma arises from my indecisive nature. All the books look so interesting that I find myself at a loss to choose what to read first. And just when I think I've chosen a book, a well meaning friend would mention the plot of a particularly attractive book and I would be hooked again. So back to square one. These are the real first world problems, if you ask me, the perils of prioritizing. Fortunately, thanks to the Neev Book Awards, I now know what would go on top of my reading list. As someone has already quite thoughtfully made a list of selected or nominated works for impulsive readers like me. Other than saving me time, the Neev Book Award has, over the years, introduced me to a variety of works and genres that I would normally not expose myself to. I think that my generation is unconsciously drawn towards Western literature due to increasing globalization and the massive influence that the West has on our lives. There is nothing wrong with that. But we must also develop an appreciation for our own nation's rich literature. A few years ago, if someone was to ask me about the Indian stories I was reading, I'm certain that my mind would go blank. Now, though, largely due to the Literature Festival and the Neev Book Award in particular, I would rattle out a bunch of books if asked that question. And hence, this award not only makes us better readers, but also better Indians who are aware and take pride in their nationality. So, stimulated discussions, great book recommendations, a plethora of Indian stories, and much more await the voracious reader. The feast is laid out, so I just have two more words for you. Dig in.
And now I'm thrilled to introduce the moderator of the panel of the reading of young adult books in India, Colin Kelman. Colin is the head of the English department at Neev Academy and a jury member of the Neev Book Award. Colin is also deeply fond of reading. There is rarely an author that anyone can mention that he doesn't know the work of in great depth, and not just literature, but really the entire world of books across all disciplines. And since it's literature, also math and also science. So over to you, Colin, for your panel discussion.
Thank you, Kavita, for that very glowing introduction. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Hi. I'll first introduce the panel itself very, very quickly. And we hope to finish in 25 minutes so that everyone can get a chance to ask their questions. And we'll take a couple of them on the panel itself. Okay, so this panel is called The Reading of Young Adult Books in India. And we hope to get all the multiple perspectives on this with a great set of human beings who are also authors. We're going to ask such questions and try and get answers to what does one put in a young adult book? And where is the idea of India in young adult books? And in fact, which of the many Indias that we know and don't know? So to help us answer these questions and many more that might come up by the way, we've got a great friend of the Neev Literature Festival who joins us here as the author of Being Gandhi. I'd like to welcome Paro Anand. Hi, Paro.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And we've got the author here who's coming in as the author of The Lies We Tell. And I'd like to welcome Himanjali Sankar. Joining us as well to help answer those questions is someone who's been many, many things, but whose first love is writing, and joins us now as the author of A Match Made in Mehndi, Nandini Bajpai. Hi, Nandini.
Hi.
Our next panelist started writing very, very early and has continued to write and joins us today as the author of The Prince.
Hi, Colin.
I'd like to welcome Samhita, Arni. Hi, Samhita.
Hi.
Glad you could join us. I've got all your books here actually before I introduce the other two, but I realize it's blending with the background. And finally, we've got two panelists who are joining us here as collaborators on a very special book, a book about the story of Major D.P. Singh, a book called Grit. And for that, I'd like to introduce them as the authors of Grit, the Major Story. We are Ferose and Sriram Jagannathan. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you,
Glad
Colin.
to have all of you.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. So we know we're in a sort of speed panel, and there are bonus marks for being concise, and we'll try to make the best of what we can. But I wanted to start by saying, you know what, that must probably have been the sparsest introduction you've had so far. But I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourselves via your books, right? We're going to do a quick circle, a quick round as an answer and to see what you say to this question. I'm going to ask you and tell our audience, why do you think the subject matter that you've written about, the people, the ideas, the events that you've written about, why do you think those are important to young adult readers? And especially young adult readers in India. So if you can tell our audience very briefly what your book is about and why you think that is important to young adults like them in India, that'll be a great way, I think, of you introducing yourselves and them hearing about the books from you. So I'd like to first invite perhaps Sriram and then Ferose, and then we'll come around to the others. So Sriram, if you can go, please.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So I'm sure Ferose will add to whatever I'm going to say right now, but when we started the idea of Grit, the biggest objective was to spread the message of inclusivity. And Ferose is very closely associated in that field. In fact, he's the founder of India Inclusion Summit. And when he approached me, we got together for this idea through some acquaintance, and we decided to work on this. And we thought young adults will be the best, crowd to target. They're with lots of interaction with adults. They can actually, talk about one topic very easily when, especially it's in the picture book format. And for us, I think for me, it was a no-brainer. I think choosing young adults as the target audience for this. We really wanted to spread the message of inclusivity. And March, there is a book series called March, and that was something as an inspiration for us. We used that as more or less like a template, and then we tried to build story in that format. I think Ferose can add a little bit more to that.
Yeah, thank you, Sriram. Maybe to make it very quick, for me, Major D.P. Singh has been a friend for almost a decade. And, I found his story to be the perfect hero's journey. Lots of ups and downs, a lot of failures and successes. And I felt that the young adults should absolutely read it, because it's a great story about how in life you will have your setbacks, but if you have the willpower, you can overcome them. And the way we wrote it was, and it was Sriram's idea, where we said that the pages where he goes through the downs in life are black and white, the ones that are ups are in color. And so very small nuances we've kind of kept in mind while writing this. And I think the only thing that I told Sriram when we started the project is, I said, I want the book to be launched on 26th July 2019, because that will be the 20 years of the Kargil War. And we were able to release on that date because we wanted to spread the message of a war veteran and what it meant to serve the country to that particular audience in a format that is extremely easy to read. You can finish the book in an hour, but you can still internalize the message.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Ferose, for that. Can we ask Samhita?
Yeah, thank you. I think I wrote the kind of book that I wish I had had access to, or I had been able to read as a young adult. And my book, very briefly, is historical fiction set in the Sangam period in South India in the 2nd century AD, which is a fascinating time period. But we don't know very much about this time period, and that's why I really wanted to write this book. I also think that, I mean, we are obsessed in this country with the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And I also wanted to broaden that out. There is a whole host of literature that comes from the Sangam period, that comes from many other periods that we are not in touch with. And to actually get young adults excited in the thrilling aspects of literature, because this literature is actually composed at a thrilling time when there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of cross-cultural trade, there's a lot of politics going on. But even more than that is to make give a sense of the difference between history and literature. I think we also live in a time when often mythology and literature are confused with history. They inspire each other. History can inspire literature and literature can inspire history, but they are not the same. So to also give a sense of that relationship, I feel that's very important to develop an understanding of that, even when one is a young adult. I think that can, shape our understanding of history in the past as we go forward.
Thank you, Samhita. I'd like to come around now to Himanjali, see what she has to say to our young adults.
So I think when it came to young adults are in this whole cusp between adulthood and childhood, and it's a confusing period for them. And I don't think it's addressed enough, especially in India. Of course, I know it's being spoken about much more now than, say, even 5 years back, but it's something that hasn't been done. And when I was reading other young adult books from other countries, I'm from the West, basically, mental health is something that's constantly spoken about and discussed in literature. While in India, our young adult literature doesn't usually talk about depression or any of the very common mental health problems that children face. So, well, I won't say that I really just wanted to address mental health, but it was also a story that I wanted to tell. And it's something that I've always been interested in, and not just about young adults, but even just the state of the human mind and how it can, it does for all of us. Sometimes it breaks, and then how do we mend our minds and how do we make ourselves feel better? So it was about all of these things, which I think are particularly important when you're younger and you're confused and you don't know how to deal with these issues. So yeah, I was telling a story based on, I also like the figure of the unreliable narrator, which is say like a gone girl or a woman on the train, so that I feel gives a lot of scope for storytelling. And I think that's why I used that as my character would fall under that. But, and I felt it for young adults, this was an important book to write, simply because it hasn't been done too much in India so far.
Thank you, Himanjali. I'd like to come around to Nandini now.
Nice. So the book that I've written, A Match Made in Mehndi, the one that was nominated for the shortlist, is actually set in New Jersey. But the protagonist is an Indian-American teenager who comes from a long line of Punjabi matchmakers. So it's sort of a lighthearted look at Indian-American traditions that have been passed down. My character is Simran Sangha, and she comes from her mother and her grandmother and all the generations of them. I'm sorry, it's very late at night, so I'm kind of half asleep, trying to wake up to tell you a little bit about the story. But so it's about a young teenager who's looking at the traditions in her family and trying to decide what to keep and what to leave behind and what to change. And her idea of looking at her mother and grandmother's tradition is to come up with a dating app. So they're actually traditional matchmakers, but she takes their techniques and she turns it into a dating app, which kind of goes viral in her high school. So it's a coming of age story. It's about different generations in an Indian American family, which I think are, relatable even to teenagers in India, or really it's universal, it's anywhere. It's, trying to find yourself as different from your family and trying to decide what's important to you.
Thank you indeed, Nandini. And now I'd like to come around finally to Paro.
Thank you, Colin and Neev. Actually, for the very first time, Being Gandhi is a book that I didn't want to write. I literally came to it kicking and screaming. much like my character, who's bored to death with Gandhi. The way that we present Gandhi to children is like, okay, enough already. We're really bored because we've dried him out and made him this face on currency notes and stuck in boring textbooks, or stone statues up on pedestals, which are too, far away from us. But the more I talk to young people, and I've talked to over 3 lakh young people, this constant refrain that, yeah, okay, this is bad, whatever it is, whatever the crisis is, it's bad. But it's nothing to do with me. It doesn't really affect me. Or I really feel badly about this, but if the government and adults can't do anything about it, what can I do? I'm just a kid. And so sort of meshing those two things together, of a kid who is growing up when riots are breaking out, and he's feeling it's nothing to do with me until it comes to his door, but not his door, but the neighbor's door. And suddenly realizing that, I don't know, Colin, could I read a little bit, which would really, I have my matching mask as a bookmark. So riots had broken out, and this absolutely irritating kid, kicking and screaming, thinking that he's never going to do his boring old Gandhi homework. But then this happens. And he thinks, if Gandhi was here right now, what would he do? If there was this kind of rioting going on, and he was not the Mahatma, but a 12-year-old boy, what would he do? How, in his gentle way, could he shake this world that severely needed shaking right now? We need Mahatma Gandhi. How I wish I could bring him back somehow, but I can't. I sit very still. I get a very strange thought. At least I think it's a very strange thought for me. It shakes me. Can I, little old odd me, can I be Gandhi?
Thank you for that, Paro. Thank you. That was lovely. And indeed, thank you, everyone. You have it there, everyone. Our audience, what those books are about, you've heard, and why they're important from the authors themselves. Thank you all. That was great. That was well done. And full mark to all of you for being concise. Now, I've got questions actually. I've got more questions that's going to come around in pairs. I was trying to think of the best way to do a quick panel. And so I've got you working in pairs now. And you don't know who you're going to be paired up with. So here goes. Now, you see, categories are guidance, I think, right? But the next category to this category is adults. And I don't even know if that's a category, right? And I've been wondering about this question. How much of the adult world can young adult readers, particularly those in India, how much can they take? How much can they receive? And I'd like Samhita and Paro to have a crack at this question, because Paro herself says in a book, I never knew I could write a book like this. And Samhita was interested in, writing a coming-of-age novel. It is a coming-of-age novel. And she says the relationship between history and literature, right? So if you don't mind, I'd like the two of you to have a crack at this question, please. Maybe Samhita first and then Paro.
I think there's not much of a, when I speak to young adults, I find that they understand everything, and sometimes they're even much more passionate and much more involved and much more introspective about things that are happening today than many adults of my acquaintance. So they think very deeply on these issues. So in terms of that, I think there is no difference between the young adult and adult category. I think maybe it is sometimes language, certain kinds of themes and how they're dealt with. You are not going to write, there's a difference between the kind of novel you would write in terms of themes and ideas and characters between young adult and adult. But in terms of understanding, I don't think there is any difference. But specifically, I also feel that in India, I mean, I myself read a lot of young adult novels. I mean, I'm 36 years old, so maybe I should not be reading so many young adult novels, but I do. And I actually find them far more richer, far more meaningful, I think far more engaged with the world that we're living in. Sometimes adult literature seems to vault into being literary and into being extremely, fancy in terms of its language, and young adult kind of brings it down. And I think literature is important. We've been hearing through the Neev Literature Festival how literature builds empathetic circuits in the brain. Reading is important for a democratic culture. So to suddenly abstract this conversation about history and literature and say, that's only something adults can get and understand, I don't like that. I want young adults to get it because I think that's fundamental to our understanding of ourselves and the community we create growing together.
I think to me, the difference between adults and young adults is that young adults are much more thoughtful, much more powerful, and much more in that position where they can make that difference. And so I think that a story, I don't know, more and more, I find myself describing work more as a call to action than just a story. Because I think that a story can get to the heart of a young adult or a child in a way that maybe an adult book cannot, or that book may not get to an adult. And so it's that call to action to say, look, if you feel it, do something about it. If you feel it, be empathetic. First of all, feel it. And I think younger people feel it much more than adults do.
Thank you, Paro. Thank you, Samhita. I've got another prompt. You see, there's the idea of India, or perhaps Indias in the plural. And I think there are even some Indias which don't exist in India. They exist elsewhere, right? And there are also India with problems. There's the India with all its problems. So how does India, its people, its values, its problems, its culture, how do those figure in the world? And I'd like to come because you see, Himanjali wrote about, you mentioned it just now, mental health. And in her book, she mentions malice, different in that place, a strong Desi protagonist. So I'd like to have the two of you attempt this question with your ideas. How does India?
Okay, I'm going first. So, yeah, well, I think it's about just writing a story, and through it, of course, the reality which I know for me personally is India. So whether it's the characters, what they're going through, it will be very, very much based on even young people that I know. And the way these things work in India will obviously be different from the way it works elsewhere. Well, in a way, when we are talking about mental health, it's something that's being spoken about in cities. It's been spoken about in urban areas. But of course, it's again very universal. It's not a class thing. It's not like people in like people of certain classes or castes or whatever face these problems. It's just that there is a different way probably in that we approach mental health in certain, like whether the way I would approach it would probably be different from how a child in a smaller town would be looking at it. So that with India is also too diverse, and every country must be, because I know India better, so I'm saying India is more diverse and there's too much diversity. So when I have to give this caveat that I'm also not representing India as such, because there is too much India out there. But what I'm representing is maybe even a slightly elitist, because it is these English educated children and their experiences. But I would like to think that suppose this book was to be translated, it would still appeal to other children elsewhere too, that it would still be significant and important in terms because it is a subject that is relevant to everyone, for everyone.
It's a really interesting question, actually. I've thought a lot about it over the years. So, the first thing I'll say is that a lot of immigrants the idea of India that they carry in their head is what they left behind. So, and this is especially true of the older generation. So my in-laws moved to the US in the 60s, and part of it is still frozen in their head. Like the India they think of is still stuck in that time warp. And, my husband grew up here, so he's had a completely different experience. He did not have that same connection that his parents did. But again, it was a bit of a time warp. But this is changing now because the world is more global. The kids get to travel more back to the home country, and they have a more updated idea of what it actually is. But it's such a huge, diverse country to begin with. And everybody's idea of India is what is very personal to them. Like my own lived experience is what I think of as India, growing up in Delhi. My father was in the army, so traveling all over the country. But there's so many people who live here who have a completely different idea of India. So you can only write about what you know. It's writing what you know. And it changes not only not only the longer you live in a completely different environment and the local Indian culture that is available to you here. So for me in the Boston area, the Indian community over here becomes India to me, even though it has nothing to do with actual India. And so it's different, it's unique, it's and even from generation to generation, my children have a completely different idea of India than I do. So it's a very interesting thought and a very interesting way to sort of but like I said, you can only write what you know.
Thank you, Neev. Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, Himanjali. And a quick one with Ferose and Sriram. I was really fascinated when I was reading the book by the nature of the collaboration. It's a three-way collaboration. Major DP Singh, it's Sriram, it's Ferose, and different aspects of the work. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the nature of your collaboration. You can go back and forth quickly, especially when you've said in the book that Major DP Singh is someone who placed kindness above cruelty and several other virtues. How was that? How did you actually manage to bring that out in a collaborative manner?
Okay, I'll go first, Feroz.
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think a lot of it was serendipity, Colin. For me, I knew Major DP Singh very well. He was a dear friend. Has been part of his journey for over a decade. But what was most important was for me, it was important that I write a graphic novel. I had moved to the US 6 years back, and I was exposed to graphic novels that I was never exposed to before in India. I had a bookstore next to my house, an entire bookstore where only they had graphic novels, nothing else, only graphic novels. And I was like, wow, this is a completely new medium. And when I wrote my first book, Gifted, I realized it had done well, but it was read only by adults. And I wanted the story of Major DP Singh to be read across age groups. So I wouldn't categorize it as young adults. It is actually across age group. I've had 10-year-old kids writing great reviews to 8-year-olds saying this is a fascinating book. So it has cut across age groups. But of course, I wanted to find a graphic novelist, and it just luck happened. And I got connected to Sriram, and we hit off DP Singh, and even though we've been collaborating for now 5 years, me and Sriram have met, me and DP Singh has met, DP Singh and Sriram has met, but three of us, we've been only planning it, it's never happened. But I think the fundamental truth, it was based on just incredible amount of trust. I knew what Sriram could do, Sriram knew what Major DP Singh could do, and I think we brought our complementary skills together. I had the idea, Sriram made it, and Major DP Singh is just such a, the book just did well. Every time he tweeted, I think hundreds of books sold. So I think we were complementary in that way.
Yeah, that's right. So I had, when I met Feroze, I had done my first graphic novel called Mai, and he knew what I could do. And by then I had read his first book called Gifted, which was a bestseller. And then, we both knew our strengths and we knew what our intentions were, each other's intentions were. And when he introduced me to Major, I think everything fell in place. I had to make Major DP Singh a little bit uncomfortable by asking some very, very difficult questions, because I had to draw out certain characteristics of him. So comfortable, but at last, like you said, all this and all his instances where he showed his grit, actually, it just came out, and then it was for us easy to put all these things together.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Ferose, and thank you indeed to everyone. And you know what? I started my stopwatch. It's now 29 minutes, so congratulations to everyone. We didn't make it to 25, but we made it to 30. And there's a huge amount of my mind is buzzing actually with the ideas that I've got to listen to the recording actually again to process it all. Thank you all very much. And over to Kavita, if we could have maybe one question.
Yes, let's try and get one audience question in. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing. It's just been fantastic. And what a wonderful place to end, the word grit, because that's, if there's one thing that we would want to pass on to our young today, is that idea of resilience and grit. And that visual of DP Singh 23 kgs and then building up to be a Blade Runner, a spectacular story. So Shrived Reddy says that I enjoyed reading all these young adult books. Do you think the messages in the young adult books should differ in maturity of a message compared to adults? Then the difference in processing the message and experience of an adult. I'd love for any two panelists to share. Colin, do you want to decide who?
I think I'll leave it open. If one could volunteer, who would like to take that? I think Paro likes to talk on such things. Paro has spoken on it earlier.
I think I have great trust in young readers, in young adults. But there's one taboo that I impose upon myself in that category rather than with adults, to always end on a note of hope, at least on an upswing. It doesn't have to be, here's the happy ending tied up in a pink bow, but it's certainly, because the teenage years are a dark time, and I always want to leave on an upswing.
Beautiful.
Completely second that.
Me too.
Yes. Thank you so much. We take the time for one more question. I think it's a chance to also for people to know the books that are in the shortlist here. When will we have Tejasvi Vade? I hope I got that name right. When will we have a book like Plutarch for Indian audience? When will we have books like these written by Dharampal about the greatness of Indian knowledge system before colonization? Young adults need that rooting to see the greatness of their country. So sort of indigenous knowledge systems, I think the book that Samhita has written, and she's deeply into mythology, though she will never agree with that with me. So I will let Samhita answer that question.
I think it's a work in progress, and I think a lot of people are getting interested in it right now. But I think for that to actually happen, we have to also broaden our understanding of history. We are very much stuck in this happened, Vedic culture, there are all these kind of politicization of that kind of history, and people's identities are very vested in it. I think for that to really happen, to really admire those conceptual systems and those knowledge systems, we need to create a little bit of distance from it. Because yes, we can admire the Upanishads, and there is a great level and depth of understanding there. But we also have to admire the oral traditions that get passed on from that, in Dalit communities. There is a host of fascinating knowledge and history and stories of resistance that are embedded in there that are also important to that development of that conceptual framework. And even visual systems. There are many narratives that have been passed on visually that have not been passed on into text, because we have to also remind ourselves that in this country, the people who had access often to transmitting things were Brahmins, came from a certain caste. And those dynamics have also shaped what conceptual knowledge, what we consider as knowledge. It isn't just what's written down. It is also what is painted. It is also the stories that are passed on from generation to generation orally. We need all three. We need much more than that as well.
Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for everyone being here. Our next event, and thank you panelists for bringing all of this alive today. I'm going to watch the video again to pick up all of the points. I couldn't type fast enough. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you with us.